I'm Sophie Anderson, 28, and I never imagined my Christmas dinner would end with my mother telling me to leave the home we've shared since Dad died. The turkey was still warm, the gravy barely touched when she looked up from her plate and said those words that shattered everything. I slid my keys across the table in response, watching her new boyfriend Richard's smug smile. 4 years of supporting her after Dad's death, and this was my reward. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from. In the comments, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned to see what happens when family betrayal meets unexpected courage. Life with Mom had been good, or at least I thought so. After Dad passed away 4 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I moved back home to help her adjust. She was devastated, we both were. Dad had been the cornerstone of our family, kind, hardworking, always putting us first. The house itself was his legacy, a charming two-story colonial he'd lovingly maintained for 20 years. I was just starting my career as a freelance graphic designer when he died. Moving back home made financial sense for both of us. Mom needed emotional support, and I needed time to build my client base without worrying about expensive rent. We settled into a comfortable routine. I paid part of the mortgage, handled the groceries, and took care of household repairs, things Dad used to do. When Mom had knee surgery 2 years ago, I was there through her entire recovery, balancing work deadlines with driving her to physical therapy appointments. "You're just like your father," she used to tell me with pride. "So dependable." Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it worked. We had movie nights on Fridays, shared cooking duties, and respected each other's space. Mom worked as an accountant at a local firm, and I converted the sunroom into my home office. The arrangement benefited us both. Everything changed 8 months ago when Mom met Richard Harrington at her high school reunion. He was a widower, a successful real estate developer, with $1 million smile and designer clothes. Their first date turned into weekly dinners, then weekend trips. Soon, Richard was a constant presence in our conversations. "Richard says the market in Aspen is booming," she'd mention over breakfast. "Richard thinks I should update my wardrobe," she'd say, coming home with shopping bags from stores she'd never entered before. I was happy for her at first. Mom deserved love after losing Dad, but subtle changes in her behavior made me uneasy. She began canceling our movie nights. The photos of Dad that had adorned our mantel disappeared one by one. Her wardrobe transformed from practical to flashy. She colored her hair, got expensive manicures, and started criticizing things about our home she'd never complained about before. "Richard thinks his kitchen is so outdated," she commented one evening, looking around with new disdain. "Dad designed this kitchen himself," I reminded her gently. She just shrugged. "That was years ago, Sophie. Times change." I tried to give her space to enjoy her new relationship even as I felt our connection fraying. Richard never made any effort to know me. During his rare visits to our house, he'd scan our furnishings with barely disguised contempt. Once, I overheard him telling Mom, "You deserve better than this modest lifestyle." Still, I wanted to support Mom's happiness, so when she suggested having Richard join us for Christmas dinner, I agreed enthusiastically. This would be our first Christmas with someone new at the table since Dad died. I spent days planning a perfect traditional meal, using all of Dad's old recipes. I decorated the house with our family ornaments, even put up the slightly crooked star that Dad had made in his workshop. The morning of Christmas, I woke early to prep the turkey and bake pies. Mom seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly and making mysterious calls from her bedroom. I chalked it up to holiday stress and focused on making everything perfect. Richard was coming at 4, and I wanted to show him that our modest lifestyle had its own special charm. Little did I know this Christmas dinner would change everything. That my place in my childhood home, and in my mother's heart, was about to be revoked over turkey and cranberry sauce. The dining room looked beautiful. I'd polished the old cherry table to a high shine, brought out Grandma's china, and arranged fresh pine boughs down the center. Candlelight softened the room's flaws, the slightly faded wallpaper, the small water stain in one corner from last winter's roof leak. The tree sparkled in the living room, and Dad's favorite Christmas album played softly in the background. Mom seemed unusually tense as she fussed with her hair and checked her reflection repeatedly. She wore a new dress I'd never seen before, something red and form-fitting that looked expensive. "You look lovely," I told her. She barely smiled. "Richard's used to more formal holiday gatherings." When Richard arrived, he brought an expensive bottle of wine and a small wrapped package for Mom. Nothing for me, but I hadn't expected anything. He wore a cashmere sweater and designer slacks, looking like he'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His cologne subtle, but clearly costly. "Merry Christmas," I greeted him warmly. "Welcome to our home." His eyes swept over the living room. "Quaint," he said in a tone that didn't sound complimentary. Mom laughed nervously. "We keep meaning to update things." "I've maintained it just how Dad liked it," I explained, feeling a need to defend our home. Richard nodded absently, clearly uninterested in anything about my father. As Mom gave him a tour, I heard him asking about square footage and property values. Strange questions for Christmas, but I focused on finishing dinner preparations. We sat down to eat at 5. I'd made everything from scratch: turkey with sage stuffing, creamy mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce from the old family recipe, and Dad's special gravy with a hint of apple cider. The food looked and smelled wonderful, and for a moment I felt a surge of pride. "Sophie did all this cooking herself," Mom told Richard, though her compliment sounded automatic. "Impressive," Richard replied, though he barely looked at the food. He kept whispering things to Mom, making her giggle like a schoolgirl. The conversation was stilted. Richard talked about his recent property acquisitions and his plans to develop a lakeside community. Mom hung on his every word. When I mentioned my recent graphic design contract with a local brewery, neither seemed interested. I was cutting into the turkey when Richard said, "This house has good bones, but it's showing its age. What year was it built, Margaret?" 1978, Mom replied. Thomas Sophie's father was very attached to it. "Real estate in this neighborhood has appreciated significantly," Richard continued. "You're sitting on untapped value." I frowned, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "It's not just about money. This house is full of memories." Richard smiled thinly. "Memories don't appreciate in value." There was an awkward silence. I served the food, hoping to shift to more appropriate Christmas dinner conversation. Mom took a few bites of turkey, then set down her fork. She and Richard exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. She cleared her throat. "Sophie, there's something we need to discuss." Her serious tone made me put down my fork. "What is it?" Mom took a deep breath, then said it. "You need to move out." The words hung in the air. I stared at her turkey halfway to my mouth, certain I'd misheard. "What did you say?" "You need to find your own place," she repeated, her voice firmer this time. "By the end of January." I looked from her to Richard, who was calmly buttering a roll as if nothing unusual was happening. "Mom, this is our home. I've been helping with the mortgage, the maintenance, everything." "I know, sweetie, but it's time for changes." She reached for Richard's hand. "Richard and I are engaged." This was the first I'd heard of any engagement. No announcement, no ring, show, nothing. Just this bombshell at Christmas dinner. "Since when?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 2 weeks ago," Richard answered for her. "We're planning to sell this house. It's outdated and too maintenance-heavy for Margaret at this stage of life." "Sell the house?" I nearly choked. "Mom, Dad built this house for us, for our family." "Thomas would want me to be happy," Mom countered, a new hardness in her voice. "We're buying a condo in the Belvedere," Richard added, naming the most exclusive building downtown. "No maintenance, full amenities, and an excellent investment." "You didn't even discuss this with me," I said to Mom, hurt slicing through me. "I've been helping pay for this house. I took care of you after your surgery. I stayed because we agreed it made sense for both of us." "You're a grown woman, Sophie," Mom said dismissively. "It's time you found your own place. Richard thinks—" "I don't care what Richard thinks," I interrupted, anger finally breaking through. "He doesn't get to decide what happens to our family home." Richard's expression darkened. "Margaret and I have made our decision. The house goes on the market February 1st. You have until January 30th to make other arrangements." I turned to Mom, hoping to see some hesitation, some recognition of what she was doing. But her face was set, her eyes avoiding mine. "Is this really what you want?" I asked her. "To sell Dad's house, to kick me out with barely a month's notice at Christmas dinner?" "Don't be dramatic, Sophie," she sighed. "You've had a free ride long enough." "A free ride?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I've contributed to this household financially and emotionally for 4 years. I put my life on hold to be here for you." "And I appreciate that," Mom said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But it's time for both of us to move on." Something inside me broke. I pushed back from the table and walked to the entryway. I took my car keys from my purse and returned to the dining room. Without a word, I slid them across the table. "Really?" I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "If that's how you feel, I'll leave tonight." Mom's eyes widened in surprise. Richard looked annoyed at the disruption. "Don't be ridiculous," Mom started, but I cut her off. "No, I think we're done here." I stood up straight. Enjoy your new life, Mom. I hope it's worth what you're giving up. I walked out of the dining room, grabbed my coat and purse, and left through the front door. The Christmas lights twinkled mockingly as I stepped into the cold December night, suddenly homeless on what should have been one of the warmest family nights of the year. The cold hit me like a physical blow as I walked to my car. I'd left without a proper jacket, just the light cardigan I'd worn for dinner. Christmas lights decorated the houses up and down the street, their cheerfulness now seeming cruel. Families would be inside those homes, opening presents, laughing, belonging. I sat in my car for several minutes, hands shaking too badly to put the key in the ignition. Tears streamed down my face, hot against my cold cheeks. What had just happened? How could Mom choose Richard and his lifestyle over our home, over me? Memories flooded back as I stared at the house. Dad teaching me to ride a bike in that driveway. Mom and Dad dancing in the kitchen while making Sunday breakfast. Dad in his workshop carefully crafting the birdhouses we still had hanging in the backyard. The 4 Christmases we'd had without him had been hard, but Mom and I had supported each other. Or so I thought. I finally started the car and drove aimlessly through town. Holiday decorations blurred through my tears. Where could I go? Most of my friends from high school had moved away. My closest college friends lived in other states. I had acquaintances from work, but no one I could call on Christmas night asking for emergency housing. After driving for nearly an hour, I pulled into a 24-hour diner. It was almost empty except for a few lonely souls like me with nowhere else to go on Christmas. I ordered coffee and sat in a corner booth trying to formulate a plan. I scrolled through my phone contacts, pausing at Amber Patel's name. We'd been close and college roommates for 3 years. We still kept in touch, though, not as often as we once did. She'd moved back to our town last year to take a job at the university as a psychology professor. Would it be too much to call her on Christmas night? Desperation won. I dialed her number. Sophie, Amber's warm voice answered. Merry Christmas, I was just thinking about you. Merry Christmas. I managed my voice cracking. There was a pause. Sophie, what's wrong? Are you okay? I broke down sobbing into the phone as I explained what had happened. Amber listened without interrupting. Where are you now? She asked when I finished. At Denny's on Maple Street. Stay there. I'm coming to get you. You're staying with me tonight. 30 minutes later, Amber walked into the diner. She looked exactly as I remembered, petite with warm brown eyes and a cloud of dark curly hair. Without a word, she pulled me into a hug and I broke down again. Come on, she said gently. Let's get you somewhere warm. In her car, she explained that she was house-sitting for a professor who was away for the holidays. There's a guest room with your name on it. Stay as long as you need. As we drove to her place, my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Sophie, you're being childish, Mom said without preamble. Her voice was cold, controlled. Come back to the house. We can discuss this like adults. There's nothing to discuss, I replied. You've made your decision. Don't be dramatic. Richard and I are planning our future. You need to plan yours, separately. I get the message. I expect you to come collect your things within the week, she continued as if I hadn't spoken. Richard has a contractor coming to evaluate renovations before we list. The casual cruelty of it struck me anew. Renovations? You're erasing Dad from the house already. This isn't about your father, Mom snapped. He's gone, Sophie. I'm still here and I deserve happiness. At the expense of everything he built for us, everything we shared. You have 1 week, she repeated. Anything left behind will be donated or discarded. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone in disbelief. She's giving me a week to get my things, I told Amber, voice hollow. Amber squeezed my shoulder. We'll figure it out. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we make a plan. At Amber's temporary home, I took a hot shower and changed into borrowed pajamas. My mind kept replaying the dinner, searching for signs I'd missed. Had Mom been planning this all along? How long had she intended to sell our home? Around midnight, I realized I needed to see the house one more time to process what was happening. I borrowed Amber's car and drove back, planning to sit outside briefly. To my surprise, Richard's luxury SUV was still in the driveway. I parked down the street and approached quietly. Light spilled from the dining room windows. They were still up talking. I crept closer, guilt mingling with a desperate need to understand. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see Mom and Richard at the table, papers spread between them. Mom was signing something. This expedites everything, Richard was saying. Once the house is sold, we'll have the capital for the Riverside development. Are you sure Sophie will be okay? Mom asked, a hint of maternal concern in her voice. Richard waved dismissively. She's a grown woman. This dependency isn't healthy for either of you. It's just, it's her home too. It's a house, Margaret. A dated, inefficient house that's tying up your capital. Don't let sentimentality cloud your judgment. I backed away, a new realization dawning. This wasn't just about Mom's new relationship or living arrangements. There was something financial at play. Richard wasn't just dating my mother. He had plans for her assets. I returned to Amber's, my mind racing. What had I just witnessed? Was Mom being manipulated? Or was she a willing participant in whatever Richard was planning? Sleep eluded me that night. By morning, shock had hardened into determination. I wouldn't just slink away from my childhood home. I needed to understand exactly what Richard was up to, and whether my mother fully comprehended what she was giving away. Not just a house, but the last physical connection to the life she'd built with Dad. The week after Christmas was one of the most stressful of my life. Finding affordable housing in our town was nearly impossible, especially on such short notice. Every apartment I looked at was either well beyond my budget or had a waiting list months long. Housing market's crazy right now, one property manager told me sympathetically, especially with the university expanding. You won't find anything decent under $1,500 a month. That figure made my stomach drop. My freelance work was steady but not lucrative enough yet to afford that kind of rent. I'd been charging below market rates to build my portfolio, and many of my clients were small local businesses with limited budgets. Amber insisted I stay with her as long as needed, but her house-sitting arrangement would end in 3 weeks. We'd both be scrambling for housing then. You could look at roommate situations, she suggested one evening as we scrolled through rental listings, or maybe a studio apartment outside of town. The financial pressure was crushing. Beyond rent, I'd need first and last month's deposit, utility connections, moving expenses. The money I'd been saving to eventually launch my own design studio would be wiped out just securing basic housing. Meanwhile, Mom grew increasingly distant. When I returned to pack my belongings, she was often out with Richard. The few times we were home together, conversation was stilted and cold. The house itself began to change. Mom hired cleaners who moved furniture, took down family photos, and packed away knickknacks. Dad's presence was being systematically erased. His workbench in the garage was dismantled. The bookshelves he'd built in the living room were emptied of his beloved history books. We need to neutralize the space for showings, Mom explained clinically when I protested. Richard appeared more frequently, bringing contractors who measured and evaluated every room. They discussed removing walls, updating the kitchen, and maximizing the property's potential. Each visit felt like another violation. I was boxing up my office when Richard entered without knocking. He surveyed my progress with impatience. "You should consider a storage unit for all this," he suggested, gesturing to my design equipment. "Most apartments won't have space." "I'll manage," I replied curtly. He leaned against the doorway, watching me work. "You know, Sophie, this transition could be positive for everyone if you'd embrace it. Your mother deserves this opportunity." What opportunity would that be? To live the life she's earned after years of sacrifice. The Belvedere offers amenities this old house never could: security, prestige, appreciation, potential. Mom never cared about prestige before you. His smile tightened. People evolve. Margaret is rediscovering herself. Something in his practiced speech bothered me. I'd heard him use similar phrases multiple times, as if he were following a script. That evening, I mentioned my concerns to Amber over takeout in her kitchen. "He talks about the house like it's just an investment," I said. "Never acknowledges what it means to our family." Amber hesitated, setting down her fork. "Sophie, I wasn't going to say anything, but I've heard things about Richard Harrington." My attention sharpened. "What things?" "The psychology department had a fundraiser last month. Richard was there with your mom." She twisted her napkin nervously. "One of the older professors recognized him. Apparently, Richard dated her friend a few years ago. Another widow. The relationship ended badly. Something about pressure to invest in property developments that never materialized." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "You think he's scamming my mom?" "I don't know," Amber admitted. "But it might be worth looking into his background." The next day, I began researching Richard Harrington online. His website showcased impressive developments and client testimonials, but something felt off. The projects listed were all in development or coming soon. Nothing seemed completed. I dug deeper, searching public records and business registrations. Richard's companies existed legally, but there were multiple BBB complaints and several civil suits that had been settled quietly. When I expanded my search to include neighboring counties, I found a newspaper article from 3 years ago, Local Widow Claims Fraud Against Developer. The details were sparse due to a settlement, but the pattern was familiar. A wealthy widow, a whirlwind romance pressure to invest in real estate ventures. I printed everything I found and tried to talk to Mom that evening. She was alone for once, reviewing paint samples for the condo. Mom, I need to talk to you about Richard. She sighed heavily. If this is another attempt to change my mind about selling, it's not that. I sat beside her. I found some concerning information about Richard's business practices. I tried to show her the documents. She refused to look. This is completely inappropriate, she said, her voice tight with anger. Richard has been nothing but generous, helping me plan for my future. Mom, please just look at these. No, Sophie, this jealousy has to stop. I understand you're upset about moving, but trying to sabotage my relationship is unacceptable. Jealousy. Mom, I'm worried about you. These women. Enough. She stood abruptly. I won't listen to this. Richard warned me you might react this way. That stopped me cold. He warned you about what? That you might resist changes, that you've grown too dependent. Her eyes softened slightly. Sweetie, I'll always be your mother, but you need your own life, and I need mine. Before I could respond, we heard a car in the driveway. Richard arrived moments later, letting himself in with a key I hadn't known he possessed. He assessed the situation immediately, noting my distress and the papers in my hand. Everything all right, ladies? He asked smoothly. Mom composed herself. Fine. Sophie was just leaving. Richard's eyes met mine, and I saw something calculating there. He knew exactly what I'd been discussing with Mom, and he wasn't concerned at all. Over the next few days, changes accelerated. A painting crew arrived to cover Dad's carefully chosen colors with bland neutrals. The realtor installed a lockbox. Mom donated Dad's remaining clothes without consulting me. Each change felt like a knife twist. This wasn't just about me losing my home. It was about Mom erasing our past, erasing Dad. And Richard was orchestrating all of it. One evening, I returned to collect more of my belongings and found Richard alone in Dad's former office, now stripped of personal items. He was examining the built-in cabinets with a contractor. These will need to be removed, Richard was saying. They're too personalized for the market. My father built those by hand, I said from the doorway. Richard turned unsurprised by my presence. Sophie, your mother mentioned you'd be by. The contractor excused himself, leaving us alone. Richard's demeanor changed instantly, the charm dropping away. I understand you've been asking questions about me, he said coolly. I stood my ground. I have concerns about your intentions with my mother. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your concern is noted, and irrelevant. Margaret and I are moving forward with our plans. Does she know about the other women, about the lawsuits? Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Be careful, Sophie. You're making accusations you can't substantiate. I have documentation. He stepped closer. Let me be clear. Your mother and I are getting married. This house will be sold. Your interference is both futile and potentially damaging, to yourself most of all. Are you threatening me? I'm advising you. Margaret is happy with me. Don't ruin that with baseless suspicions. His voice lowered. And consider your own position. A struggling freelancer making accusations against a respected businessman who would believe you. He brushed past me, conversation clearly over. I stood in Dad's empty office, shaking with anger and fear. Richard hadn't directly threatened me, but his message was clear: back off. I wouldn't back off. But I needed to be smarter about how I proceeded. Richard had already convinced Mom not to listen to me. I needed evidence she couldn't ignore, and allies who could help me present it effectively. I was more certain than ever that Richard was exploiting my mother, and I was the only one who could stop him. By mid-January, I was running out of time. Mom had listed the house priced well below market value for a quick sale. Richard's renovation plans were proceeding rapidly. I'd moved most of my belongings to a small storage unit, living out of suitcases at Amber's place. The search for Richard's past yielded more concerning patterns. Through social media groups, I connected with Linda Morales, a woman from a neighboring county who dated Richard 2 years earlier. We met at a coffee shop 30 miles away, where she wouldn't be recognized. Linda was in her 50s, elegant and composed, but I saw pain flash across her face when she spoke of Richard. He was charming, attentive, she explained, stirring her untouched tea. After my husband died, Richard seemed like a miracle. He understood grief never rushed me. Her story mirrored my mother's experience perfectly. Romance followed by financial discussions, followed by pressure to invest in property developments. I nearly gave him everything, Linda admitted. My retirement, my home equity. He had documents ready, made it seem urgent. What stopped you? I asked, my daughter's suspicions. And look! She pulled out her phone, showing me a news article. Another woman came forward right as I was about to sign. Richard disappeared overnight. I never heard from him again until I saw your message. I showed Linda the research I'd compiled. She confirmed more details, adding names of other potential victims. The pattern was clear. Richard targeted grieving widows with assets, isolated them from family, then extracted investments before disappearing. Will you help me convince my mother? I asked. Linda hesitated. These men, they're manipulators. They create dependency, make you distrust your own judgment. Your mother may not be ready to hear this. Nevertheless, she gave me a signed statement about her experience and contact information for 2 other women. Armed with this evidence, I decided to consult a legal expert. Through Amber's boyfriend, Jason, a third-year law student, I connected with Walter Green, a semi-retired attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse. Green had been our family lawyer years ago, handling my parents' will after I was born. When we met at his modest office, recognition dawned on his weathered face. Sophie Anderson, Thomas's daughter. He smiled sadly. You look like him. I hadn't expected that connection to hit so hard. It had been months since anyone had mentioned my resemblance to Dad. I explained the situation, showing him my evidence about Richard. Green listened intently, occasionally making notes. Financial exploitation is notoriously difficult to prove before money changes hands, he advised. Your mother is competent legally, making her own decisions. But she's being manipulated. Manipulation isn't always illegal, unfortunately. He reviewed my documents again. However, there's another angle we should explore. You mentioned your father's will. Have you seen it since his passing? I shook my head. Mom handled all that. Let me pull the file. He disappeared into a records room, returning with a folder. Thomas was very specific about the house. As he explained the details, my breath caught. Dad had indeed left the house to Mom, but with conditions I hadn't known about. A significant portion of the property's value was held in trust for me, accessible when I turned 30, or if the house was sold before then. Your mother may not fully understand these provisions, Green suggested. Or, he didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Either Mom didn't know I was legally entitled to a portion of the house's value, or she did know and was proceeding anyway. There's more, Green continued, pulling out another document. Thomas left a letter to be opened if the house was ever sold. My hands trembled as I took the sealed envelope with "For Sophie, if home is sold," written in Dad's familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter and a small key. Dad's words brought tears immediately. He wrote of his love for our family home, his hopes it would remain in the family, but his understanding that circumstances change. The key, he explained, opened a safe deposit box containing insurance that you'll always have a home of your own. What does that mean? I asked Green. I'm not certain, he admitted. Thomas was private about some matters, but this gives us legal grounds to at least delay the sale until we clarify your interests. Green helped me draft a formal notice to the real estate agent and potential buyers, indicating there were unresolved ownership questions. It wouldn't stop the sale permanently, but it would slow things down. That evening, I found Mom alone at the house, reviewing condo floor plans. The place was almost unrecognizable now. Walls freshly painted in bland beige furniture, rearranged family photos packed away. We need to talk, I said, placing Dad's letter and Green's legal assessment on the table. Mom glanced at the papers without touching them. More accusations about Richard. No, this is about Dad's will, about the house. Something flitted across her face. Uncertainty. Guilt. Your father left the house to me. He did, with conditions. I pushed the documents toward her, including provisions for me. She finally looked at the papers, her expression changing as she read. Richard said the will was straightforward. Richard saw Dad's will. Mom nodded slowly. He helped me review everything, said we needed to understand my assets before planning our future. A chill ran through me. Did he explain this trust, my portion of the house's value? Her silence was answer enough. I continued as gently as I could. Mom, I've found evidence that Richard has done this before. Multiple times. He targets widows, rushes them to sell property or make investments, then disappears with the money. That's ridiculous, she insisted, but with less conviction than before. Richard loves me. Mom, please, just look at what I found. Talk to Walter Green. He remembers Dad remembers what the house meant to him. She pushed the papers back toward me. I can't do this now. Richard will be here soon to take me to dinner. Then read it later, but please read it. I stood to leave, then remembered the key. Dad left something for me in a safe deposit box. Do you know which bank? Mom's expression softened momentarily. First National downtown. He always used them. It wasn't much, but it was the first civil exchange we'd had in weeks. As I reached the door, I turned back. Mom, I miss Dad too, every day. But selling this house won't bring closure. It just erases what we had. She didn't answer, but for the first time since Christmas, she met my eyes without anger. It was a start. The next morning, I visited First National Bank. The safe deposit box contained a thick envelope and a small wooden box with my name carved into the lid, one of Dad's woodworking projects. The envelope held legal documents and a bank statement for an account I'd never known about. Dad had been saving for me since the day I was born, a separate fund from my college account. His letter explained he'd continued adding to it even after I moved back home, knowing someday I'd need it to start my own life, my own home. The balance wasn't enormous, but it was enough for a substantial down payment on a small place of my own. Enough that I wouldn't be homeless. Enough that I could face whatever came next with security. The wooden box contained something even more precious, Dad's journal from the year before he died. In it, he wrote about his hopes for Mom and me, his concerns about leaving us financially secure, and most importantly, his unwavering belief in my potential. Sophie will make her own way, he'd written. She has courage and vision. Sometimes she just needs a reminder that she's stronger than she knows. Reading his words, I felt something shift inside me. I'd been fighting to hold on to the past, the house, the family we'd been. But Dad had prepared for the future, believing in my ability to adapt and thrive. I still needed to protect Mom from Richard. But now I understood what Dad had been telling me from beyond home wasn't just the house he'd built. It was the strength he'd built in me. Armed with Dad's journal, financial documents, and the mounting evidence against Richard, I realized I needed to execute a careful plan. Simply confronting Mom again wouldn't work. Richard had too strong a hold on her. I needed to create a situation where the truth would be undeniable. I called Linda Morales and the other women who'd been willing to share their experiences with Richard. Together, we constructed a timeline of his activities over the past 5 years. The relationships, the investments solicited the disappearances. The pattern was unmistakable. Walter Green helped me file a formal legal notice regarding my interest in the house, effectively putting any sale on temporary hold. When Richard discovered this roadblock, his mask of charm began to slip. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, storming into the house one evening while I was collecting the last of my things. He waved the legal notice in my face. "You're interfering with a legitimate sale." "I'm protecting my legal interests," I replied calmly, though my heart raced. "Dad made provisions for me in his will." Richard's face darkened. "Your mother and I have plans for that money, plans that don't include you." The admission was telling. He'd just confirmed this was about money, not Mom's happiness. "What exactly are those plans, Richard?" "Another development opportunity that never materializes, like the ones you pitched to Linda Morales or Catherine Winters." The color drained from his face. For a moment he was speechless. Then his expression hardened. "You stupid girl, you have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I think I do." He stepped closer, intimidating. "Whatever you think you know, you can't prove. Your mother trusts me completely. One word from me and she'll cut you off entirely." "Is that what you want? For her to lose her only family?" "Family is overrated. What Margaret needs is someone who understands finance, who can secure her future." "By stealing her assets." His composure cracked. He grabbed my arm roughly. "Listen carefully. Back off, or what, Richard?" Mom's voice came from the doorway. We both turned, startled. Mom stood there, face pale, a stack of papers in her hand. Richard released my arm immediately, his demeanor transforming. "Margaret, darling, just a misunderstanding with Sophie about the house sale." Mom's eyes were fixed on the red marks on my arm where Richard had grabbed me. "I heard what you said. About my money. About my daughter." Richard recovered quickly. "You misunderstood. Sophie has been making wild accusations. So you didn't pressure Linda Morales to invest in a fake development, or Catherine Winters, or Janet Kowalski." Mom held up the papers, the documentation I'd compiled. "I found these in Sophie's room. I was going to throw them away without looking, but then—" She trailed off, glancing at me with something like regret. "I remembered how your father always said you had good instincts about people. Better than mine." Richard switched tactics. "Margaret, we've discussed this. Sophie is trying to keep you dependent, stuck in the past. We have plans." "Your plans," Mom interrupted. "Not ours. You never asked what I wanted." She turned to me. "And neither did you, Sophie." That struck me silent. She was right. I'd been fighting so hard to preserve Dad's legacy that I hadn't considered Mom might have her own wishes separate from both Dad and Richard. "I think you should leave Richard," Mom said firmly. His charming facade vanished completely. "Don't be a fool, Margaret. You're nothing without me. This pathetic house, your mediocre life, I was offering you an upgrade." "Get out," Mom repeated, her voice stronger. "Or I call the police and show them these documents." Richard looked from Mom to me, calculating his options. Finally, he straightened his jacket with exaggerated dignity. "You'll regret this," he said. "Both of you." After he left, Mom and I stood in awkward silence. 4 months of tension stretched between us. "I'm sorry," we both said simultaneously, then gave small surprised laughs. "I should have listened to you," Mom admitted. "I should have talked to you sooner, more openly," I countered. We moved to the kitchen, the heart of our home where so many important family discussions had happened over the years. Mom made tea, a small return to normalcy. "I found Dad's journal," I told her, "and the account he set aside for me." Mom nodded. "He always worried about providing for us, even at the end." "Why didn't you tell me about the trust, about my portion of the house?" She stared into her tea. "At first it didn't seem relevant. You were living here, we were managing together. Then when Richard suggested selling, he said it would be simpler to handle the details after the sale." The manipulation was clear now. Richard had been systematically driving a wedge between us, isolating Mom from the one person who might question his motives. "What happens now?" I asked. "I don't know," Mom admitted. "I still think I need a change, Sophie. This house, it's full of Thomas. Sometimes that's comforting, but sometimes it makes it harder to move forward." I finished for her. She nodded, relieved at my understanding. "But selling isn't the only option. And whatever I decide, it should include your input. Your father would want that." The path to healing our relationship wouldn't be instantaneous. Too much had been said, too many hurtful actions taken. But that night marked a turning point. For the first time since Christmas, I felt hope that Mom and I could find our way back to each other. The next morning, I returned to Amber's with renewed determination. Richard wasn't finished. Men like him rarely gave up easily. I needed to protect both Mom and myself from whatever he might try next. Jason, now fully invested in our situation, suggested a preemptive move. "Let's talk to the other women he scammed. File a formal complaint with the district attorney." Within a week, we'd assembled enough evidence to interest the authorities. Richard Harrington, it turned out, wasn't even his real name. He'd operated under at least 3 different identities over the past decade, always targeting wealthy widows with valuable properties. When detectives contacted Mom for a statement, she hesitated only briefly before agreeing to cooperate. Facing her mistake took courage, but Mom had always been stronger than she gave herself credit for. "Your father would be proud of you," she told me after giving her statement. "You fought for our family when I couldn't see what was happening." Richard was arrested 2 weeks later while attempting to flee the state. The charges were serious fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse. The case would take months to resolve, but his threat to our family was over. As for the house, our home, Mom and I reached a compromise. We decided not to sell immediately, but to take time exploring our options. Mom would rent a small apartment for 6 months, experiencing the independent life she craved without permanently cutting ties to the house Dad built. I would stay with Amber until finding my own place, using Dad's gift to secure a future he'd always believed I could achieve. Home, I was learning, wasn't just the walls Dad had constructed. It was the strength he'd built in both of us, the resilience to face change, and the courage to protect what matters most. 6 months after that fateful Christmas dinner, I stood in my new workspace, sunlight streaming through tall windows. Using Dad's unexpected gift as startup capital, I'd leased a small commercial space downtown and launched Anderson Design Studio. The risk had paid off. My client list was growing, and I'd just hired my first assistant. The journey hadn't been easy. Richard's arrest made local headlines exposing Mom to community gossip. Some friends distanced themselves, embarrassed by their own enthusiasm for the charming con man. Mom faced her humiliation with dignity, even agreeing to speak at a community workshop on financial exploitation of seniors. "If my experience helps one other person avoid this pain, it's worth it," she told me. Our relationship healed gradually. Weekly dinners became our new tradition. We talked more openly about Dad, about grief, about our different ways of moving forward. I came to understand her need for change wasn't a rejection of the past, but a necessary step in her healing. Mom decided not to sell the house after all. Instead, she rented it to a young family while she continued living in her apartment, enjoying her newfound independence. The rental income supplemented her retirement savings, and knowing a family was filling the home with new memories brought her unexpected comfort. Your father built that house for family, she explained. It should have children in it. I found a small but charming condo of my own using Dad's savings as a down payment. It needed work, but I enjoyed applying the home improvement skills he'd taught me. Each repaired cabinet and painted wall felt like a conversation with him. As for Richard, or Michael Turner, his real name, justice moved forward. Multiple victims came forward after his arrest, strengthening the case. He eventually accepted a plea deal rather than face a public trial, receiving a substantial prison sentence and orders to pay restitution. The most healing moment came when we received a package from the evidence department after Richard's conviction. Inside were items he'd taken from our house, including Dad's watch, which Mom thought she'd misplaced, and a small wooden music box he'd made for their 20th anniversary. He was erasing Thomas piece by piece, Mom realized, holding the recovered treasures. And I let him. He was manipulating your grief, I reminded her gently. That's how he operated. On a warm evening in June, I invited Mom to my condo for dinner, our first holiday celebration since the Christmas disaster. I'd prepared Dad's traditional summer barbecue recipes and decorated my small patio with string lights. Mom arrived with a housewarming gift, a framed photo of Dad in his workshop smiling at the camera with sawdust in his hair. For your new home, she said, so part of him is with you here too. Over dinner, we talked about the future. Mom had started volunteering at a grief support group, sharing her experience with Richard as a cautionary tale. I shared news about an exciting new client that could expand my business significantly. I'm thinking of selling the apartment, Mom mentioned as we enjoyed dessert. Not to move back to the house. The family renting it is wonderful and they've signed a 2-year lease. But maybe to find something in between. Not too full of memories, but not so sterile either. Whatever you decide, we'll figure it out together, I promised. As the evening ended, Mom hugged me tightly. I'm sorry for what happened at Christmas, she whispered, for choosing him over you even briefly. It's behind us, I assured her. We're stronger now. And we were. Dad had built our family home with love, but he'd also built something more durable. The resilience to weather loss, the wisdom to recognize manipulation, and the courage to begin again when necessary. When Mom left that night, I stood on my small balcony looking at the city lights. Dad's journal sat on my bedside table, a daily reminder of his faith in me. The painful Christmas ultimatum that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, pushing me toward independence I might not have otherwise sought. Home, I realized, wasn't just a physical place. It was the connection between people who loved each other enough to fight for what mattered even when the path forward wasn't clear. Dad had known that all along. The next Christmas would be different. Mom and I were planning a small dinner at my place, honoring old traditions while creating new ones. We'd survived the worst kind of betrayal and found our way back to each other, wiser, stronger, and more appreciative of the foundation Dad had built for us. Have you ever had to completely rebuild your life after a betrayal? What gave you the strength to start over? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more about life's unexpected journeys. Remember, sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Thank you for listening, and may your own homes be filled with love and genuine connection.